We have a real problem with critical thinking in America. And one of the places that it's very evident is this false narrative that's been spread about AI automating developers' jobs. Now, let's dive into first using the core features of what we're hearing and thinking about them without AI. So that's really the component of critical thinking that would be valuable here is how can I take something that does seem like it has some, truth behind it, which is, hey, people are losing their jobs, but let's go ahead and substitute that narrative. Really, that's the idea with critical thinking is substitute it for something else. And let's go ahead and dive into some of the core things without using the word AI. First, we see that people are getting jobs eliminated in the software industry. Well, there are many ways that people could lose their job that involve non AI. And to start with, there are people in organizations that do absolutely nothing. I've come across people like this. I hold no grudges against these people. I've worked with people that are very nice, in fact, but they actually do no work. I don't know if they're self aware enough to know that they do no work, but these types of people do exist. And so if you fire a person that does no work, there will be no impact. And that's the bottom line is all organizations contain these kinds of people. You see it in academics, you see it in management, you see it in the technical industry. So if you then spread a false message and say, well, AI took my job, well, nothing took your job because your job didn't exist. You were just filling the space. And when you were eliminated, AI didn't do anything because you didn't do anything. So that's kind of the first place is that there is a need sometimes. I don't think it's that common, but there is a need sometimes to eliminate positions where somebody really does do nothing. And you could look at lots of different examples of this. Maybe look at David Graeber, right, who has a book called Bullshit Jobs, where he talks about many jobs are just straight up bullshit, like a taskmaster or a box ticker or a goon, etc. So those kinds of jobs don't need to exist. So AI did not automate those jobs. The job just didn't need to exist. Okay, let's move on to the next one, which is there are developers. I've been a manager before in my life. I've also worked as a software engineer quite a bit. I've taught lots of students at different universities, Duke, Northwestern, Berkeley, etc., UNC. And there are developers that have very low or no skills, even negative skills. Let's dive into this for a second and say that if you fired someone who wrote really buggy code and replaced their buggy code with maybe another developer who used, let's say, this fancier auto completion through agents to be a little bit more productive, is AI replacing that person's job? No. That person had negative value to an organization. It sounds very um, hostile to say that, or very like pessimistic to say that, but there are situations where people, every time they write software, they make a system worse by eliminating that person. Even if you didn't do any kind of automation, you would make your company better. So that's another thing to put into the equation here is that essentially anything that would get that person out of the organization would make the company better. So using like a better editor or having CI/CD or using like, software engineering best practices and firing that person, is that going to make your organization better? So again, this next one, which is the low skilled or negative developer, getting rid of them has nothing to do with the word AI. Now let's move on to section 3 here, which is that it is a fact that you can automate certain tasks with software. I'll give you a story. When I was working at Disney Feature Animation, this was in approximately 2003 or so, I was working at the premier location for Disney Feature Animation, which is in Burbank. And one of the tasks that I did was I had to go in on a Saturday and do this kind of maintenance with machines. And this maintenance was I would put a CD in, I would defragment a hard drive, et cetera, et cetera. And I looked at the problem. I said, look, this is just a bash script. Why am I doing this? Why don't I just re-image all the machines automatically, and then we don't have to come in on a Saturday? So I did that. I spent a little bit of time, maybe a week or two, wrote some code, tested it out, and then the result was I could just go over to any machine, reboot it, hold down the in key, which would boot the Macs onto a network volume. There was a bash script that would run at a startup, and it would replace the machine. So you could make the argument, if we're using the same kind of logic as these grifters at OpenAI or NVIDIA would say, is you used AI, breathlessly, you automated someone's job. I have been automating people's jobs my entire life. I literally automate people's jobs. That's what I've been doing with basic scripts. A bash script is not AI. It has no form of intelligence. It's a for loop with some conditions in it. So if you look at the situation that many companies have very poor processes, and it would be very easy to make a more efficient process or to automate something with a basic script. And so then again, if you determine, like in the case of the automation I did at Disney, where there's a lot of people that did this work that was useless, that has absolutely nothing to do with AI. I just wrote some code that made something more automated. This has been happening for the history of software engineering. People have been automating jobs. But if you then believe this magical thinking false narrative that, oh, you used AI is what solved the problem, then you're unfortunately not using the critical thinking skills. Now let's move on to the fourth point here, which is that there are useful things that large language models do. I've been teaching machine learning for almost 10 years. Again, Northwestern, Berkeley, Duke, etc. I've been writing books about machine learning and ML ops. Of course, linear regression is useful. K-means clustering is useful. Auto-completion is useful. Transcribing audio to video are useful, but these are narrow components. Each of these narrow components has zero intelligence. All they're doing is doing a specific task. And so if you think about how could it possibly be the case that you're using a task-based intelligence, and that task-based intelligence can do all of the things that a human can do, it's non sequitur. It doesn't make sense. So when someone says you automated a job with a large language model, what are you talking about? It doesn't make sense. Probably you're doing one of those other things that I just discussed, which is maybe someone did nothing, or maybe someone had zero or negative skills, or there was something that easily could be automated. So this is conflating something that's been happening for decades with some kind of intelligence. And that's really the key here, is that large language models are not intelligent. So how could they possibly be this mystical thing that's automating things? Now, another thing to bring up, another point is that it is common to outsource jobs to lower cost regions. So when you hear someone say, oh, my job was taken by AI, it's possible your job was taken because it was outsourced to another team or to some lower cost region. This is very common in America. I'm not saying it's right or that it should be done. I think there should be stronger union protections and worker protections in America, but it's very likely that some people that are saying that their job was automated with AI, or some organizations who are saying that they automated jobs with AI, simply outsourced it to a lower cost region like India or Mexico or China. Now let's move to the final reason that is a false reason that you may hear that people are talking about automating people's jobs, is that it's very common for large companies to fire 3%. Microsoft just fired 3% of their workforce. You hear this with Apple, you hear this with Amazon, is that fear is one of the ways that American corporations, especially toxic American corporations, motivate people, is they want you to feel like you're underneath the sword of Damocles. Every day you wake up and, oh, is this the day? Am I going to get fired? Is the sword going to drop? And is it going to kill me? Right? What do I do? What do I do? And so by saying that AI is going to come for your job soon, it's a great false narrative to spread fear. where people worry about, oh, the AI is coming. Again, more likely, if you go back to some of the other things here, maybe somebody is doing nothing. That does happen. Maybe somebody has zero or negative skills. Or maybe there's a very simple DevOps operation where you put the code into a CI/CD system, the code automatically builds, code automatically deploys because you have such good testing and automation. Maybe you need less people, like people don't have to patch production and run all kinds of different manual scripts because the automation is in place. It's more likely what happened. And in fact, I would say 100% likely what happened is there's some form of traditional automation that occurred. And then finally, let's wrap up with the ultimate reason we're hearing that AI is automating software engineers' jobs is that a salesperson somewhere, either the CEO of a company like Anthropic, who is a liar, who said that software engineering jobs will be automated with agents. It's just a straight up lie. I've used the agents. They have no concept of intelligence, and I have no reason to lie about it either. It's just a lie, and I'm going to point out the lie. Likewise, we hear OpenAI. This is a little bit easier because Sam Altman of OpenAI is a known liar, lies about everything, exaggerates about everything. They're just trying to sell people this false narrative to get investment and to get users. Or in the case of a marketing person, I saw this recently in an article from The Atlantic. A chief marketing officer said, oh, the new thing is we're automating everybody's job. Well, hold on a second. Let me look at your resume. I go to LinkedIn, I look at his resume. He's never worked as a software engineer. All he's done is marketing jobs. How could you possibly know if software can be automated if you're marketing? You know absolutely nothing about software engineering. More, again, I do. I spent my entire life, I wrote 10 books about automation. I teach automation. That it's more likely just traditional, simple facts like someone has been doing absolutely nothing at work, or someone doesn't have a lot of skills, or there is a reasonable use case for basic automation, etc. So that's really the final reason is there's some salesperson like the NVIDIA CEO who wants to sell GPUs who is lying to you and saying something that's completely false. And that's the reason why people are saying AI will replace coders. And finally, to wrap up with this is we know that the word AI is a bad word for large language models. These are narrow intelligence, narrow AI, or even you could call it narrow machine learning. They do one task like autocomplete, and then they chain together these simple tasks, and there is no concept of intelligence that's embedded inside of there. So really, in many ways, when you hear this critical thinking problem of AI will replace this, it highlights what is in fact even a bigger problem, which is a severe lack of critical thinking in America. People just blindly accept things they read in a newspaper or that they hear on a TV show. A lot of the people that are saying these things are either completely naive or incompetent at the thing they're talking about, or they're liars who are trying to sell you things. And that's really the problem with the narrative that AI will replace coding jobs is there's absolutely zero evidence. In fact, there's the opposite evidence is that using these kinds of tools who have advanced capabilities by somebody who doesn't know what they're doing and doesn't know what good is could lead to catastrophic failure. In fact, I've seen this in my career when people who don't have basic algorithmic understanding or basic DevOps skills get introduced to high-level languages like Python. I've seen them create hundreds of millions of dollars in damage to organizations. So it's much more likely the story of AI is that it is a very powerful tool that is dumb as a bag of rocks and left into the hands of the inexperienced and the naive and the fools could create catastrophic software that we don't yet know how bad the effects will be. So that's really my wrap up of the rebuttal of this idea that AI will replace software engineers.